You wake up and it's already talking, before your feet hit the floor. Before you've decided how you feel about the day, it's commenting, evaluating, rehearsing conversations that haven't happened, replaying ones that did. Most of the time, you don't even notice it. It's just there. The longest relationship of your life. And almost no one ever asks the obvious question, who is actually designing this voice? This is not a film about silencing your thoughts or forcing them to be positive. This is about the fact that the conversation happening in your head is the primary architect of the self you live inside. And most people have never claimed authorship of it. It is already speaking before you have decided to listen. Not loudly, not dramatically, just present. Commenting on the quality of your sleep. Anticipating the first difficult conversation of the day. Replaying the one from yesterday that still feels unfinished. Most of the time it feels like thinking, like the normal background activity of a mind. But if you watch it carefully for even a few moments, something quieter becomes visible. It is not only describing your life, it is arranging it. The tone it uses becomes the tone you carry into the room. The predictions it makes shape what you are willing to attempt. The story it repeats about who you are eventually feels less like a story and more like a fact. This happens without ceremony, without your formal consent. It simply continues day after day, building the self you live inside while you are busy living. We rarely examine the process itself. We examine the outcomes, the hesitation before speaking, the over-preparation for something that should feel routine, the sudden drop in confidence at the exact moment it is needed, the private critic that speaks to us in a way we would never accept from anyone else. We treat these as personal shortcomings, or as personality, or as just the way we are. Rarely do we consider that they may be the logical result of an inner architecture that has been running without deliberate design. This is not a failure of character. It is the natural consequence of leaving the most influential conversation of your life on autopilot. And the longer it remains unexamined, the more the structure it builds begins to feel like the only possible one. For some people, the voice arrives as clear words, with tone, with rhythm, a running commentary that can feel as real as speaking out loud. You can hear the inflection. You can almost sense the volume. It debates, it warns, it rehearses, it criticizes. For others, it comes differently, as images that flash and vanish, as a shift in the body, a tightening, a drop, a subtle forward lean, as a quiet knowing that never bothers to become language at all. Both are normal. Neither is superior. But both are doing the same quiet work. They are constructing the ongoing story of who you are while you are occupied with everything else. The form is different. The influence is not. You can spend years trying to change your behavior while the inner conversation that drives the behavior remains untouched. You can read the books, attend the courses, set the goals, track the habits, and still find yourself inside the same familiar internal weather. Not because you lack discipline, not because you haven't tried hard enough, but because the architecture underneath has not been examined. The voice does not need your permission to continue. It only needs your inattention. And inattention is the default setting for almost everyone. Most of us inherit the early patterns without ever realizing we have inherited them. From childhood, from the voices that surrounded us when we were too young to question them, from the culture we moved through, from the moments of success and failure that left an imprint. Some of those patterns are useful, some are protective, some were accurate once and are no longer accurate now. The mind does not automatically update them, it repeats them, and repetition over time becomes identity. What began as a protective warning can become a permanent limitation. What began as a high standard can become a private form of cruelty. What began as someone else's voice can eventually feel like your own deepest truth. Notice how quickly the voice moves from a single event to a statement about who you are. This film is going to ask you to look at the process itself with more precision than most people ever do, to notice the patterns without immediately judging them. Because once you can see the architecture clearly, you are no longer only living inside it. You are in a position to decide what gets built next. Are you ready to turn the light on and look directly at the structure that has been shaping you all along? The voice did not appear by accident. It is not a glitch in consciousness. It is not a modern problem created by stress, screens, or the pace of contemporary life. It is an old solution to an even older set of problems. For most of human history, survival depended on the ability to cooperate, to anticipate what others might do, and to regulate your own behavior when no one else was watching. Language gave us a powerful way to do all three. Once we could speak to each other with precision, the same neural machinery could be turned inward. We began to speak to ourselves. At first, the speech was still external. Children still do this openly. You can watch a young child building something and hear the entire process out loud. The child is not performing for an audience. The child is thinking with the voice. The speech is a tool for directing attention, sequencing actions, monitoring progress, and correcting mistakes in real time. Over months and years, that outer speech becomes quieter. It turns into muttering, then into silent inner speech. What began as guidance from a parent, a teacher, or an older sibling eventually becomes guidance from within. The voice is, in many ways, internalized relationship. It carries the echoes of every significant influence that shaped us while we were still forming. This developmental progression is not trivial. It gives us the ability to plan without immediately acting, to rehearse a conversation before it happens, to catch an impulse before it becomes behavior, to hold a goal in mind when the environment offers every reason to abandon it, to evaluate our own actions against an internal standard, to simulate possible futures and adjust course before the consequences arrive. In evolutionary terms, these capacities were highly valuable. Individuals who could regulate themselves more effectively, who could simulate social and physical futures with greater accuracy, who could navigate complex group dynamics, were more likely to survive, form alliances, and pass on their traits. The inner process became a portable advisor, a strategist, a monitor, a private coach that traveled with us into every situation. But every powerful tool carries a double edge. The same system that allows us to plan also allows us to worry endlessly about plans that may never be needed. The same system that helps us learn from the past also allows us to replay the past long after the useful lesson has been extracted. The same system that lets us simulate other minds can turn into relentless social evaluation, status monitoring, and self-consciousness that interferes with the very performance it is trying to protect. Modern neuroscience has begun to map the networks involved with increasing clarity. When we engage in self-referential thinking, reflecting on who we are, what we have done, what might happen next, how we appear to others, a set of interconnected regions known as the default mode network becomes active. Key hubs include the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex. These areas help integrate autobiographical memory, future simulation, and personal relevance into an ongoing sense of self. Inner speech often weaves itself into this network. Language regions involved in producing and perceiving speech also activate, even though no audible sound is made. The brain uses much of the same machinery it would for speaking aloud, minus the final motor commands that move the mouth and vocal cords. Executive control systems in the prefrontal cortex help determine what receives attention and what is allowed to continue. They act, in a sense, like a conductor, deciding which themes are amplified and which are quieted. Emotional tone is not separate from this process. Additional structures help color the inner experience with feeling, encouragement, urgency, criticism, warmth, or threat. The result is a sophisticated, dynamic system capable of remarkable flexibility. It can support clear planning, emotional regulation, creative problem solving, and social navigation. It can also generate the repetitive, self-focused loops that many people experience as chatter, the spinning, the replaying, the anticipatory dread, the private harshness, the same machinery. Very different outcomes depending on how it is directed and how long certain patterns have been allowed to repeat. Importantly, not everyone experiences this process in the same form. Some people live with a near constant verbal monologue, detailed, dialogic, complete with tone and imagined back and forth. You can almost hear the inflection. The voice debates, warns, rehearses, and criticizes with the texture of real speech. Others experience far less verbal inner speech and rely more on imagery, bodily feeling, or a kind of unsymbolized knowing that never fully becomes words. Thoughts arrive, as flashes of understanding, shifts in the body, or quiet conceptual clarity without narration. These differences are real and well documented. Researchers using careful sampling methods have shown that inner experience includes inner speaking, inner seeing, feelings, sensory awareness, and unsymbolized thinking. Most people experience a mix, with different elements dominating at different times. A meaningful portion of people report little to no verbal inner speech at all. This is not a disorder. It is a natural variation, much like the spectrum of visual imagery that ranges from vivid to absent. What remains consistent across the spectrum is the influence. Whether the process arrives as words, images, bodily shifts, or quiet conceptual awareness, it still participates in constructing the sense of self. It still shapes emotional responses. It still guides what feels possible or impossible. It still organizes memory and expectation. The form varies, the architectural role does not. This is why the voice feels so intimate and so difficult to examine. It developed as a tool of self-regulation and social navigation. It was never designed to be neutral. It was designed to keep us oriented, protected, and connected to the group. In the environments in which it evolved, many of its default settings were useful. Threat detection needed to be fast. Social evaluation needed to be sensitive. Memory of past errors needed to be sticky enough to prevent repetition. In the complexity of modern life, those same settings often overfire. The system that once helped us avoid real physical threats now generates elaborate threat simulations about conversations, performance, status, belonging, and future scenarios that may never occur. The system that once helped us learn from limited experience now replays and magnifies small social errors long after they have ceased to matter. The system that once supported group cohesion can now produce chronic self-consciousness and the feeling of being perpetually evaluated. None of this means the system is broken. It means the system is powerful and largely untrained. Most of us received no deliberate education in how to work with the inner process. We inherited it. We absorbed its early patterns during the years when we had the least capacity to question them. And then we spent decades living inside the structure it continued to build. Consider how early the patterns take root. A child is corrected harshly and internalizes a tone of voice. A child succeeds and receives praise tied tightly to performance rather than to effort or character. A child witnesses conflict and absorbs strategies for self-protection. A child is ignored or dismissed in certain emotional states and learns which parts of experience are acceptable to acknowledge. These moments do not remain external. They become part of the inner architecture. Years later, the adult version of that child may still hear a version of those early voices when under pressure, when facing uncertainty, when preparing to be seen or evaluated. The content may have updated with adult language and adult concerns. The emotional signature often has not. This is not pathology. It is simply how a learning system works when no one teaches it to revise its own code. The voice continues to operate according to the instructions it was given, long after the original conditions have changed. Understanding the origins does not automatically free us, but it does change the relationship. When you recognize that the voice is an evolved and developed tool rather than an authoritative narrator of objective truth, something subtle but important shifts. It becomes possible to observe it instead of only obeying it. It becomes possible to notice its patterns without immediately accepting them as identity. It becomes possible to see that the architecture was built for reasons and can therefore be examined, refined, and in some cases deliberately redesigned. The voice exists because it was useful, it remains useful, but usefulness without skill eventually becomes limitation. And limitation, repeated long enough, begins to feel like the shape of a life. The inner process is not your enemy. It is also not your master by default. It is a sophisticated system that has been running on a combination of evolutionary defaults and personal history. Most people never question the operating instructions. They simply live inside the results. In the next part of this film, we will look directly at the cost of leaving this system on autopilot, not as a moral failing, not as a personal weakness, not as evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you, simply as the predictable result of a powerful process running without conscious authorship. The costs are real. They appear in performance, in relationships, in the private quality of daily experience, and in the gradual narrowing of what a person believes is possible for themselves. But the costs are also informative. They reveal the power of the system, and power, once seen clearly, can be worked with. For now, it is enough to see the origin clearly. The companion in your head is not random. It is old. It is adaptive. It carries the imprint of both the species and your particular history, and it is still building. The only question is whether you will continue to let the construction continue unexamined and undirected, or whether you are willing to look at the system itself with the same seriousness you have previously reserved for the outcomes it produces. There is a cost to leaving the inner process on autopilot. It is not always dramatic. It rarely arrives as a single collapse or a public failure. Most of the time, it accumulates the way small structural stresses accumulate in a building, quietly, steadily, almost invisibly, until the load becomes visible in the quality of a life. The cost appears in performance, it appears in relationships, it appears in the private atmosphere of ordinary days. Rarely do we trace them back to their actual source, a powerful, sophisticated system that has been running for years without deliberate training or conscious authorship. Psychologists have given the unhelpful side of this process a simple and accurate name: chatter. Chatter is not ordinary thinking. It is the repetitive, self-focused loop that feels difficult to escape once it has begun. It takes a single awkward moment and replays it long after the moment has ended. It anticipates disaster in vivid detail, the cascade of consequences that have not yet occurred and may never occur. It turns one event into a sweeping statement about character, competence, or worth. It keeps the mind occupied with itself at the exact moments when the situation requires presence, clarity, or decisive action. The everyday costs are easy to underestimate because they are so familiar they have become invisible. Attention is divided. Tasks take longer because part of the mind is still replaying yesterday or rehearsing a future that has not arrived. Energy is quietly drained by internal conflict that never reaches resolution. Sleep is affected. Patience shortens. The capacity to be fully present with other people diminishes. In relationships, the cost becomes relational. We bring the inner critic into the room with us. We project judgment onto others that actually belongs to the voice inside. We withdraw into private debate instead of staying available. Over months and years, this erodes intimacy, trust, and the simple pleasure of being with another human being without the constant internal noise. Many people never connect the quality of their relationships to the quality of the conversation they are having with themselves. In higher stakes domains, the costs become more visible. Athletes and professionals describe the sudden shift from fluid performance to self-conscious monitoring. The focus shifts from contribution to self-protection. The phenomenon has a name: choking. One of the most common and corrosive forms of this interference is the harsh inner critic. It highlights flaws with surgical precision and often ignores or minimizes strengths. It dwells on failures far longer than it acknowledges successes. The critic often claims to be helpful, the guardian of excellence. In practice, its effect is usually the opposite. The gap between the critic most people actually live with and the internal coach they need is a primary source of unnecessary private suffering. Trying not to think about something can make it more salient. The mind is not designed to obey simple suppression commands. The effort to avoid a thought frequently increases its return and its emotional charge. Effective change requires working with the actual mechanisms of the mind. It requires the capacity to notice the pattern while it is happening. It requires the ability to create psychological distance from the content of the voice. This is the tax. It is paid in attention, in energy, in the quality of presence, and in the gradual constriction of what you allow yourself to attempt, risk, or become. Most people pay this tax without ever fully naming it. Yet the same evidence that reveals the cost also reveals the opportunity. The architecture is not fixed. The patterns are not permanent features of your character. The tax does not have to remain the default price of having a human mind. In the next part of this film, we will turn toward those who have learned to work with the system differently, not by forcing positivity, but by changing their relationship to the inner process itself. The tax is not a life sentence. It is information. The costs of an unregulated inner process are real. They are widespread. They extract a measurable tax on attention, energy, relationships, performance, and the private quality of a life. And yet they are not universal in their effect. Some people face the same uncertainties and respond differently. They still hear the voice. They still experience hesitation. The difference is the relationship they have developed with the process itself. This episode is about that difference, not as motivation, not as inspiration, as evidence. Across domains, sport, leadership, creative work, a consistent pattern appears among those who navigate the inner process more skillfully. They do not eliminate the voice. They do not achieve permanent silence. They develop a different stance toward what arises. They notice earlier. They create distance more readily. They recover from interference more quickly and with less residual self-attack. This is not a personality trait reserved for the gifted. It is a trainable capacity. The evidence for it is both practical and scientific. One of the clearest and most durable frameworks for understanding this difference comes from the work of Tim Galway and what he called the inner game. Galway observed that every performer has two selves operating simultaneously. Self 1 is the teller, the conscious, critical, instructional voice. Self 2 is the doer, the natural, embodied intelligence that includes the body and the capacities honed through deliberate practice. In moments of peak performance, Self 2 is allowed to operate with relatively little interference. Attention is absorbed in the task. When Self 1 becomes loud, filled with shoulds, fears of failure, or technical overthinking, performance suffers. The interference creates tension. The result is familiar to almost anyone who has choked under pressure. The capacity available in practice becomes partially inaccessible. Master performers do not eliminate Self 1. They change its role and its volume. They learn to quiet interference and trust deeper capacities. Elite athletes replace vague emotional reactions and global self-judgments with specific, strategy-focused cues that keep attention on execution. The same principles surface in leadership. A person shifts into distanced self-talk, referring to themselves by name to create psychological space. In creative work, a writer confronting internal blockage may move from the critic's global condemnation to a more precise and generative stance. The first pattern is radical awareness. They notice when chatter, criticism, or fear-based anticipation arises rather than being fully identified with it. The second pattern is intentional language. They make deliberate choices about the content, tone, and specificity of what they say to themselves. The third pattern is psychological distancing. Using the second or third person creates a measurable degree of separation from emotional intensity. The fourth pattern is earned trust in embodied and trained capacity. They allow the nervous system and unconscious systems to operate. The adult brain is not fixed. Through attention and repetition, it continues to form new connections. This capacity is called neuroplasticity. When awareness, distancing, and constructive redirection are practiced with consistency, alternative pathways are strengthened. Change is possible. The relationship to the voice can evolve from unconscious endurance to conscious authorship. The capacity is already present. The only question is if it will be developed. The previous episodes established three things with increasing clarity. The inner process is powerful and constantly constructive. Left on autopilot, it exacts a real and measurable tax. And a different relationship to it is possible, one that has been demonstrated by people across many domains and is supported by what we know about how the brain changes. What remains is the practical question. How does an ordinary person begin to move from passive endurance of the inner process to active authorship of it? This episode is about that movement, not as theory, as method. The work begins with a single foundational capacity, awareness. Before any redesign is possible, the process itself must become visible. Most people live inside their inner conversation the way a fish lives in water, so continuously present that it is rarely perceived as a distinct phenomenon. The first task is to make the invisible visible. This does not require hours of formal meditation or special conditions. It requires the repeated, low-stakes decision to notice. Several times a day in the middle of ordinary activities, brushing teeth, waiting, walking between rooms, sitting down at a desk. Pause for 10 to 30 seconds and ask a simple question. What is arising in my inner world right now? Notice whatever is present: words, images, bodily sensations, emotional tone, or a quiet conceptual knowing without language. There is no need to change anything in these first moments. The only task is to observe with a degree of friendly precision. Over days and weeks, this simple act begins to build the muscle of meta-awareness, the capacity to notice the process while it is occurring rather than being fully identical with it. Many people report that the act of noticing itself often reduces the intensity of unhelpful patterns. Visibility creates a small but crucial gap. That gap is the beginning of choice. Once awareness has begun to stabilize, a second capacity becomes available: the ability to create psychological distance. When chatter, criticism, or fear-based anticipation is noticed, it is possible to relate to it differently than before. One of the most practical tools is neutral labeling, silently naming the pattern. This is chatter. This is the old critic. This is anticipatory fear. Engages prefrontal networks and reduces immersion. The content is still present, but it is no longer the entire field of experience. A related tool is distanced self-talk, referring to oneself by name or in the second person: Brian, you have handled difficult conversations before, or you've prepared for this, creates a measurable degree of separation from emotional intensity. Research has shown that this small linguistic shift can support clearer thinking and better regulation under pressure. It is not a trick. It is a way of changing the relationship to the material that is arising. A third simple tool is the one-breath reset. When awareness reveals rising interference, take one conscious breath. On the inhale, notice the physical sensation. On the exhale, allow a slight release of the grip the thought or feeling has taken. This physiological interruption often creates enough space for a more intentional next response. None of these tools require the difficult material to disappear. They change the degree of identification with it. And reduced identification is the precondition for design. With awareness and distance available, it becomes possible to move into active design. The framework is simple and repeatable: awareness, distance, design, integration. Pillar 1 is awareness, noticing what is arising. Pillar 2 is distance, creating psychological space. Pillar 3 is design, the deliberate choice of a more constructive internal response. This may be an instructional cue focused on the next action. It may be a brief motivational reminder grounded in prior evidence. It may be a regulatory statement that restores steadiness. The key is that the response is chosen rather than automatic, and that it is specific enough to be useful in the actual moment. Pillar 4 is integration, taking a small action aligned with the newly designed response, and then briefly reflecting on what occurred. This closes the loop. The brain learns from the experience of behaving differently. For deeper patterns, use the voice design cycle. Notice, name, reframe, and rehearse. Embody, review. This moves the work from purely cognitive reframing into embodied experience. Realistic expectations matter. Change in the inner process is rarely linear or dramatic. Old patterns will continue to arise, especially under stress. This is not evidence of failure. The measure of progress is not the permanent disappearance of difficulty. It is the increasing speed of recognition, the growing ease of creating distance, the greater availability of useful cues, and the shorter duration of interference once it has begun. Secondary self-attack, the critic attacking the self for having a critic, also tends to diminish with practice. That alone changes the internal climate significantly. Self-compassion is not an optional softener in this work. It is a practical requirement. When the same pattern is met with clarity and basic kindness, "This is human, I am learning," the system remains more workable. The work is most sustainable when it is woven into the existing structure of a day. 2 simple bookend rituals are particularly effective. In the morning, take a few minutes to notice the current inner state and clarify intentions. In the evening, take a few minutes to review. Where did the inner process support you? Where did interference arise? What small adjustment might be worth trying tomorrow? End with a brief, compassionate statement. These rituals do not need to be long. 5 to 10 minutes on each end of the day is often sufficient. Over time, the formal practices begin to generalize. Awareness arises more spontaneously. What began as technique starts to feel natural. This is what it means to take the pen. It means that the constructive power of the inner process is no longer left entirely on default settings. It means that the long-standing stories can be revised through lived experience. The architecture is already under construction. The only open question is whether the next phase of the building will continue by default, or whether it will begin to reflect more conscious design. You have now walked the full arc of this film. You met the companion that has been speaking for as long as you can remember. You saw that it is not random, not a glitch, and not merely a modern inconvenience. It is an old and powerful system, evolved for regulation, planning, and social navigation. It continues to construct the self you live inside. Whether you direct it or not, you examine the tax that accumulates when the system runs on default settings. The divided attention, the interference under pressure, the relational cost, the private harshness that most people would never accept from anyone else. The gradual narrowing of what feels possible. You then saw evidence that a different relationship is available, not the absence of difficulty, not permanent silence or forced positivity, but a trained capacity to notice, to create distance, to choose language and attention more deliberately, and to recover more quickly when interference arises. Finally, you were given concrete methods, awareness practices, and the 4 pillars. Awareness, distance, design, and integration, and the voice design cycle, tools that can be used in ordinary moments by ordinary people. The journey of the film is complete. The work it points toward is not. The central claim of this film has been simple and consistent. The conversation happening in your head is one of the primary architects of the self you inhabit and the life that self creates. Most people never fully claim authorship of that conversation. They inherit its early patterns, absorb its emotional signatures, and then spend years living inside the structure it continues to build. The alternative is not to wage war on the mind. It is to develop a more precise and intentional relationship with it. Awareness makes the process visible. Distance reduces immersion and creates choice. Design allows a more useful response to be chosen. Integration lets the new pattern be tested and strengthened through real action. These are not abstract ideals. They are repeatable moves. They can be practiced in the small moments that make up a life, before a conversation, after a setback, in the middle of hesitation, at the beginning and end of a day. Over time, the formal practices begin to generalize. What once required deliberate effort starts to arise more naturally. The baseline of the inner climate shifts. The tax decreases. The sense of authorship increases. It is worth being precise about what this work does not promise. It does not promise that difficult thoughts and feelings will cease to arise. It does not promise a permanent state of internal peace or unbroken confidence. It does not promise that old patterns will never return. What it does offer is more modest and more durable, a clearer view of the process that has been shaping you, a growing capacity to relate to that process rather than being fully run by it, practical tools for interrupting unhelpful loops and installing more useful ones, and the cumulative effect of treating your own mind as a system worthy of skilled attention. The difference between living at the mercy of the inner process and living in increasing authorship of it is not subtle. It appears in the quality of attention you can bring to your work, in the presence you can offer other people, in the speed of recovery after difficulty, in the accuracy of the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what is possible. These are the medium in which a life is lived. You are not your voice. You are the one who can hear it, question it, refine it, and ultimately direct more of its constructive power. That distinction is the foundation. The voice is a powerful companion and a sophisticated tool. It is not the final authority on who you are. It is material that can be worked with. The pen has always been in your hand. Most people simply never realized they were allowed to use it, or that using it skillfully was one of the highest leverage things they could do. The architecture is already under construction. It will continue to be under construction for as long as you are alive. The only real question is one of design. This film does not end with a command. It ends with an invitation. Turn toward the conversation that has been shaping you. Look at it with more precision. Practice the small, repeatable acts of awareness, distance, design, and integration. Protect the work with basic self-compassion so that it can continue. The companion is still speaking. It will continue to speak. The difference is that you no longer have to let it design entirely in the dark. You can turn the light on. You can examine the structure. You can decide with increasing skill what gets built next. The pen is in your hand. The page is still being written. Write carefully.